Hello, dear esteemed viewers. Welcome back to this week's inter-university interface. With me here, I'm joined by a panel of distinguished ladies and gentlemen to help us discuss a very important topic that we are to look into today, which is sustainable development compatible with growth? But before we go into tonight's discussion, I want us to first put this into perspective. On Monday, the 5th of June, the world celebrated World Environment Day, which I believe it's a day that is pertinent to all the panelists on tonight's panel, and it's something that would resonate with a young panel today. So to put into this topic into perspective, I am joined by a panel from various universities, including Chambogo, UCU, and IUIU. So right on my right hand, I'm joined by a gentleman by the name Rahim. Rahim will introduce himself and tell us more about him. Right after Rahim, I have a lady from Uganda Christian University by the name Birungi. Birungi will introduce herself later on, and then you'll get to know who she is. And last but not least, a gentleman from Islamic University in Uganda by the names of Nyombi Haruna. So I'll start with you as you come this side. Please introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Thank you. My name is Nyombi Haruna. Good evening to the viewers. Drake, thank you for hosting me. Like I said, I'm Nyombi Haruna from the Islamic University in Uganda, Kampala campus. I'm a second-year student pursuing a Bachelor's of Laws at the same university. It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. We are very humbled to host you on tonight's show, Mr. Nyombi Haruna. I understand this is your maiden day, and I'm looking forward to having a very fruitful discussion with you. Sure. Privileged to have you here. Yes, Birungi.
Thank you so much, Drake. My name is Birungi Ajira, and I am a law student at Uganda Christian University. I like telling people I am a poet. I like telling people I'm a speaker. Yeah, I am a passionate writer, and I'm so humbled to be here today.
Thank you. Poet, speaker, passionate writer. Shall see how you put those skills into discussing topics relating to climate change. Yes, Mr. Rahim.
Okay, so thank you all for inviting me. This is also my maiden day. The names are Chibirango Osama Rahim. I'm a student at Chambogo University. I'm under a program of information technology and computing, but I also do undertake debate under the same university, where I also happen to be the deputy speaker. I take environmental concerns very seriously, because at the end of the day, we serve it, and it also serves to sustain us at the end of the day anyways. So yeah, this is an intriguing conversation. I like the panel that we have, the diversity in university. So yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you. Very, very strong portfolios we have here on tonight's discussion. I'll start with you, the lady, the only lady on the panel today. I said earlier on Monday, the 5th of June, we celebrated World Environment Day with the theme of beat plastic. Yeah, beat plastic pollution. And that doesn't go coincidentally with what we're discussing today. Our topic today is sustainable development compatible with economic growth? And we know we are in an ever-evolving world, and a world that is fast-growing economically as well as human growth. Now, put this debate into perspective. I'm just going to ask a simple question. How would you define sustainable development, and how do you perceive its compatibility with economic growth?
Okay. Thank you so much once again. To begin with, I want to say that sustainable development is not only needed for economic growth, but it is very compatible. It is not only compatible, but it is needed, because the economy depends on green, the economy depends on the resources, the economy depends on the environment. Trade for goods and services is all dependent on the environment.
True.
So that means sustainable development and economic growth are very compatible for a thriving economy. We look at a whole hunger for economic growth and the GDP that is needed to be rising at a very serious speed. and we get to forget the environment. But what we forget all the time is that the environment is so much, should actually be so much in line with the economy. The economy is so dependent on the environment. So that is why the two are very compatible.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I would bring Mr. Rahim before I engage Haruna. She says that the argument that environment, that sustainable development and economic growth move in tandem, they are compatible, because for the economy to grow, it also has to rely on the environment, and the environment has to, move in hand with the economy. But I would like us to now explore the other aspect of tonight's conversation. I want to. I first want us to look at countries. Yeah, I want us to possibly you can provide me with countries that where we see sustainable development and economic growth, where they have successfully integrated the two and be in position to see that there is not only sustainable development but there is economic growth. Citing examples and give us reasons as to why you think those countries are doing better or successful in that manner.
Okay, so I think the very best of countries I could literally talk about is not even just one country, it's more of a couple of states that are together. That is the United States. These guys have literally developed a program to ensure that even in their industries where they need maybe the most core of contradicting concepts in terms of energy, you need vast amounts of energy from oil, from things of the like that we know are possibly harming the environment. They still ensure to innovate. They still ensure to kind of develop the technology that is going to still support the industries, but at the end of the day, still ensure it's sustainable. So in this, I just want to highlight one small thing about like sustainability or sustainable development anyways. Most people think that sustainable development is only about, we are fighting for the environment and things of the like. I think the United kind of nations and the allegiance with the US think otherwise. When you tell them, or when they talk about sustainable development, they talk about majorly three aspects. The first aspect is, of course, what we introduced to the debate, the protection of the environment. Why? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much money you're able to make if the people that are going to come after you are going to suffer and invest more money into kind of recovering from the problems that you ignored. So that is why it makes sense. But secondly, we think sustainable development runs around the idea of what we call social equity. Are you presenting enough opportunities for these people, right? And why is this still important? You need to recognize that at the end of the day, humans in of themselves are resources. So it is still a part of resources in terms of development that we want to ensure that are still, being given the same opportunity so that they are productive in terms of labor. And then the very last thing, that is the third aspect, is still economic prosperity. Because we also try to think innovate about it contingently, that all these things, all the social equity and all the protection of the environment are still interlinked with how the economy is working. You literally can't defend the environment if you do not have the money. So at the end of the day, sustainable development is an aspect of looking at how do we manage these three things while trading off what it would individually give us if we just looked at just one small thing. So in that conversation, I think we are not looking at something like, is sustainable development bad or is economic growth better? No, it is just a simple conversation. Can we derive concepts that are in line with those two specific things? And as I've already shown you, economic prosperity is already an aspect of sustainable development. So probably that is where we should engage from here
I'll
on.
come back to you. Let me engage Aruna. He says economic prosperity is something that can be achieved as a way of achieving sustainable development. But I'd like to disagree with him. Maybe he will come and defend himself later. You see, when he raises the issue of social equity versus economic growth, you know that in the world that we live in, the real world that we live in, aside from the argumentations from the book, if you had to put this into perspective, when we're having economic growth, it's very unlikely that when you're having economic growth, you will at the same time fight inequalities in society. With economic growth comes with economic inequalities, in that the rich become very rich and the poor become very poor. That means the poor that are in the society would not have achieved, we would not have achieved sustainable what? Development. Now my question to you is, exploring all the various SDGs that we have in place, what mechanisms can we employ, yeah, to achieve sustainable development? As he argues that for economic prosperity to be achieved, we need to have social equity. But as I've shown you, economic prosperity can in one way or the other still affect social equity. What interventions can be done to help combat that?
Thank you so much, Drake. Let me begin from what my sister Bironji was talking about, maybe climate change and other things. But before I go to that as well, you'll find that to talk about sustainable development versus economic growth, we would require to first of all go back to the SDGs that you're talking about that were adopted in 2012. I think that was in Brazil, where they laid out a number of things that these countries agreed upon to have in place so that they achieve, I think by 2030, that they achieve they have those outcomes. And if you get all of them, for instance, amongst the SDGs, I think having zero hunger by 2030, reducing poverty levels, talking about gender equality, amongst others, quality education. These are in line with most of the human rights that we are having. And so you can relate the SDGs with human rights, put them together, then equate them to the economic growth. I'll bring you first to quality education. If we are having quality education, that means people are going to be skilled. If they are skilled, you're going to have employable people, people who know what to do, who basically know what to do in terms of skills, so that when you employ these people, or even creating employment, innovation. So if you give people quality education, they will be having those skills, they'll be having the knowledge to create employment for others, and even knowing what to do. In terms of climate change, that means we can use these SDGs to sensitize people, relying on the SDGs to have civic education amongst the populace. So that means we are going to have a generation that is going to keep these resources that we are having, not for themselves, but even in trust for the future generations that are going to use them. Yeah, I think if we happen to look at those SDGs, we try as countries, we put them into practice, we see to it that everything is followed to the letter. I think we can reach where we want in terms of economic growth. He was talking about countries that you asked about him. Look at our neighbors here in Rwanda. At least if you look at what they are doing the other side, you see they're in line with the SDGs, and you can sense something of economic growth. One of the SDGs is looking at a clean environment and even good health. Hospitals are being built and ensuring that people are healthy. If you're having healthy people, that means these people will be able to go and work. You get that? And if they work, that means you're going to attain economic growth. If you keep the infrastructure for the people, let's say the road network, you're giving space to people to carry out what they're supposed to do to get money. Therefore, you're going to reduce the poverty levels. You get that?
It's okay.
Yeah.
From there, he uses numerous examples, but I'll always bring the conversations back to what we're facing. It's true that when you have good road networks, we're in a position to combat poverty. When, all the examples he cites are true. But let us now get to reality. I'll engage with you, Ms. Bivonji. From the example of construction of roads, we know when we construct roads, we affect biodiversity. Yes? We go ahead and alter the soil compartments that are already established. Not so? Now, we need those roads for movement of trade. Not so? Aside from even us needing the roads, we establish factories that possibly emit fossil fuels that are detrimental to the environment. Now, my question to you is, do you think that sustainable development from the examples that I've used, are they compatible with economic growth?
Once again, thank you so much
Yeah.
for that question. I still think sustainable development is still 100% compatible with economic growth because there are so many other forms of development that we could harness so that we could achieve development. I will run away from your examples and I will come back to them. And I want you to look at USA. He talked about the USA. Those guys have have actually exploited wind energy, solar energy, hydroelectric power, and these are actually environmental friendly. And we are also looking at developments of AI to blockchain. How about we use these technologies and these developments to actually in a way that you're developing an app that is actually creating a sweet spot for humanity. Of if you're creating, the other day we were pitching projects at Innovation Village, and there's a lady that pitched a Diva Grow card. This was a card that was intended to save a woman that is not able to run off to the market and without having to exchange money through cash, but just using the Diva Grow card. So these are ways in which we can actually use these developments and these technologies to actually harness economic growth without having to do away with with taking care of the environment. Going back to example that you drew from the roads and mainly from the roads. If we are having these roads, how about we create subways and flyovers? Yeah, so that when we have this kind of developments, we are not actually digging so much into the part of the environment because we are making it easy for people to travel while we are actually growing the economy. So these are actually working side by side. It is working hand because we cannot wake up in the morning and we are doing away with all the roads. We can't wake up in the morning and we are pushing away all the oil. But it's just making sure we use them in such a way that it is hand in hand with the economic growth, that it is all in line without having to do away with what we need for humanity, the proper housing, the confidence, and creating a space for the future generation.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Rahim,
Yes.
picking from Ms. Birunji's argumentation that we cannot entirely do away with the aspects of construction of roads vis-a-vis because we have to conserve our environment. But I'm going to pose a question to you. You see, the example of US that all of you have cited, in my humble opinion, I think USA is not one of the best countries to use to look at sustainable development. In my own view, I think Denmark is the leading country in terms of sustainable development. And sustainable development, you have to consider all the 17 SDGs, not only environment, but also you look at no poverty, zero hunger, good health, good housing, among others. Now, my question still comes back to you now on the aspect of what has Denmark done for them to achieve sustainable development, yeah, vis-a-vis economic growth. Sustainable development considering environment, considering gender equality, considering zero hunger, considering employment. What have they done that you think we can do in Uganda and African countries to emulate them?
Okay, so once I was in a debate actually, and someone presented this opinion which I now carry on, and I think I should share it here as well. So that person, who I won't say, said that however much you can have policies, if people are not willing to adhere to those policies, if people are not going to implement them, and you have them in the books, they will never actually give you the fruits of those policies. Because at the end of the day, if you're in Uganda and you tell people, oh, you're actually not supposed to drop Kavera, or you tell them that actually, I think we should now transit from using Kavera or plastic products and go to something that is more sustainable for the environment. Because those people feel sort of unsatisfied with the government or feel like their own social equity is compromised in a way, their freedoms, their rights, those things, they're probably not going to adhere to those policies because the actor that is giving them the policies is one who is infringing on their social equity. I want you to look at a country like Denmark. It's literally the most free country in the world, right? All its citizens talk about, walking around or cycling around with their president. That's because in this country, what they probably appreciate most is social equity, the significance of the people. And at the end of the day, if you appreciate the significance of the people, if you're able to show and give merit to what people do in terms of what they feel like they should express themselves in speech, in democracy, and things of the like, these people are going to follow those policies we set. I believe Uganda actually is part of, the United Nations, and it has received the SDGs and the likes, but people are simply not following them because who is giving us these policies, right? Yeah, is it the same government that probably beats us on streets and now wants us to follow these policies with the little money that we have to compromise, or like compromise the little money that we make just in order to achieve this sort of thing? I think what Denmark has then done is just, first of all, put its social equity in place for people to be appreciated, for people to feel like government is really serving what it is supposed to be serving. After that, these people will be able to follow those specific policies. Without that, I don't think non-standing like a standard for Uganda would actually work, because we already have the SDGs, but little of us know of them because it's probably quote-unquote government propaganda.
It's okay. Before I ask another question, you have something to say?
Yes, Ibrahim, respectfully, you say that you told us about the nature of the laws, of what it could be like in Uganda, and of the nature of the policies of what it is like in Denmark and what it is like in Uganda. But we get to draw back to the line of what is the nature of the laws. The law is the law, and it ought to be followed. If the law has no sanction, then it is immaterial, then it is not being effective. So I'm looking at if these laws are in place and they are being, because look at Rwanda, they have one of the strictest laws that could ever be followed there. So if we have such laws, the nature of the law is supposed to ably sanction whoever it is that is not following it. So if we have such laws that are protecting the environment, that are emphasizing these policies, that are actually that are going green, we have something we call green taxes, where the subsidization is mainly on activities that are friendly to the environment. So these are the kind of policies that we would actually need, so that our whole love and wanting to see the environment thrive is actually coming to pass. So the nature of the law is also very, very important. That if we have these laws strict enough and thrilling enough to move the people to actually go green, then we can actually achieve sustainable development, and it will actually come well in line with economic growth.
All right. You have something to say, sir?
Yeah. In addition to what she's saying, in Uganda, I think even the laws are there. But the problem we're having is that if you're talking about sustainable development vis-a-vis economic growth, that aspect of the law and human rights has to be considered. Now, for the laws, you'll find that they are being applied segregatively. Take an instance. If we are talking about environmental conservation in a place, Rubiji, I think around Busega, you push away people from that area because you want to conserve the environment. Then a few days later on, or months, you put there an industry. So the laws, they are kind of being used to serve the interests of other persons. Take an instance in, I think, Rwanda. People are not supposed to cultivate or do any economic activity from that place. But I find there is an industry. So are we really being realistic if you're talking about implementing the SDGs? No. Some countries are being real putting these things in practice, saying, okay, it's about the environment, conserving the environment. No kavera, the plastics. Let's regulate the use of plastics, plastic bottles, and even plastic papers. But we find in Uganda, the same people that will be say that those who are supposed to implement these laws, they're the ones in the manufacturing sector, they're the ones who are promoting even the use of these things in their supermarkets. They even have industries, or even they import the same things that we're not supposed to use here. Look at there, you talked about the fossil fuels. I think if we use these resources bearing in mind with the environment, I think we can attain economic growth, but without affecting the environment. We have the, for instance,
Just there,
yes, please.
from your submission, you said we can attain economic growth while sustaining or conserving the environment. But previously, the examples that you cite show that there has been failure, not only from the stakeholder in the government, to, on that failure to uphold environmental conservation. The example you cite, that the government comes through NEMA, says you are not supposed to be on this particular piece of land. A few months down the road, an industry is established there. Now, how can we achieve economic growth while protecting the environment, yet the same enforcer or the same law-making body has failed to uphold the law that they've put in place?
Thank you so much, Drake. Now, this is why I'm bringing up this. In Uganda, we have a lot of land, even free land. Okay, vast land that is unoccupied. There must be gazetted areas where we're supposed to have maybe industrial parks, such areas that are not going to affect our environment. Like, you cannot tell me there is space in an industrial park, let's say in Mbale or even in Karamoja, then you leave it, then come and occupy a swamp area in Busega, or you go to Reda. Yet there are other places that you could utilize without affecting this. Let's go to the water resources as well. The lakes, people are mining sand from the lakes. We can devise other means, we can devise other ways of how we can go attain economic growth without basically trying to interfere with our environmental resources here, like the swamps, even the water resources, without interfering with them, because we have to coexist. We have to coexist. The ecosystem things. Let's try to be. I think we have to be innovative. There must be also goodwill from the leaders. You cannot say a thing, yet you're doing what is contrary to what you're saying.
Okay, let me hold you there. Talk about goodwill. You talk about a number of issues that are very pertinent in tonight's discussion. Allow me to engage you, Birunji, then I come to you, Mr. Rahim. I want us to look into the environmental economics now. The aspect of us surviving, achieving sustainable development, at the same time having economic growth. Now, when I talk about environmental economics, I want us to look at what particular trade-offs can we do away with, or how can we help to achieve sustainable development. I'm going to start with you. I want you to explore environmental impact versus industrial expansion. You know that when industries are definitely being when industries are being put up, it definitely has an impact on the environment, either during the construction or when it's already established, in terms of releasing fossil fuel into the air, among others. Now, how can we reduce the aspect of environmental impact vis-a-vis us establishing these industries that help later on provide employment opportunities that will help help achieve among the SDGs the aspect of no poverty, zero hunger, among others. So explore environment impact versus in industrial expansion, and what you think we can do for us to harmoniously achieve sustainable development.
You are actually drawing a very, very good cycle from industries being constructed, and taking away part of the environment and causing fumes but creating so you see it's a cycle.
Yeah.
So my question is, to what extent are we going to do away with economic growth so as to protect the environment? Because we are looking at making sure this generation survives and also keeping the environment for the next generation. So first of all, we are going to look at waste management in these industries. How about we make it better? That if there is too much waste that is being moved from these industries, how best can we treat this waste so that it is not too hazardous to the environment? Because I hope we are all going to agree that there is no way we are going to do away with these developments 100%, because we are agreeing that we are living in a diverse environment where we have to have these developments, and we have to have the environment well conserved. So we have to look at how best are we going to treat the waste that is from the industries. If there's Kavera that is from the industry, are we going to treat that? Are we going to recycle? Behind Chirika, there's so many bags of packed up bottles that are usually taken away for recycling. And there's along Chira Road too, there are also very many trenches of very dirty bottles and smelly garbage there. Of how best can we treat that? If we can ably treat that and then recycle it, then there is development, there's continuation in development. And it would be different if we were just throwing this waste and it is just left that is just left for no man to handle.
Okay.
So the best way we could do that we could actually live alongside each other is by making sure whatever waste is moving from the industries, if you're putting up this road, why are you taking this road through? You're not taking this road through a swamp. There could be alternatives. The whole I was reading a book by W.W. Rostow, and he was talking about the hunger for growth is actually a non-communist manifesto, meaning if there is so much insatiable hunger for economic growth, then it will actually be degrading to the environment. So how about we regulate the hunger for both, for too much of the go green, because we'll have riots of people fighting, don't touch our land, don't touch our roads, don't touch. But if we actually let it go hand in hand, then we will have a very harmonious environment that we're actually managing well.
Thank you. Interesting insights. We are still discussing environmental economics. She talks about waste management, waste treatment, among others. Now, I want us to look into the aspect of short-term costs versus long-term benefits. Now, how do we look into this? Because when you're looking into the aspect of waste management, definitely industries are going to look into how much am I wasting here? How much am I incurring in this short run? You understand also, let me bring in the aspect of renewable energy. If let's say we are trying to fight the aspect of fossil fuels to have greenhouse gases that are coming up that are friendly to the environment, definitely you have to incur costs. Now, I wanted to explore the aspect of the short-term costs that industries ought to incur versus the long-term benefits. What do we need to do? Or how can we address this? What can we trade off? What can be done? What interventions can be explored for the short-term benefit, for the short-term costs not to be felt too much?
Okay. So I think I'll just start from sustainable development and make clarity on that. So as we all know, or as we might get to know, is that sustainable development is not something that you're going to get probably into a short run period, right? That is why it is called sustainable. It has to go on for years and years. That is why when he talked about when the mission was actually made, it was projected to 2030, something like, I don't know, 20 years plus.
Years to go now.
Are we there? Yeah, that shouldn't be the question yet. Are we there? It will be a question though, somewhere else. But then, of course, yes, we do have to appreciate that sort of thing, that it is a long-term kind of. I want us to look at it in this way. If you're going to probably make payments towards it as an investor, as a producer, what you're doing is what people in economics call a long-term investment.
Mm.
It is not something that is probably going to pay you in the short run, but it is protecting you from something in the long run. That is why you pay for it. Why? It is very simple. So the idea that, yes, you're probably going to make a lot of money because you've set up in a swamp, it's been very convenient, it's probably near your customers and things of the like, seems good in the short run, right? Not until those customers are now facing things like, poor drainage facilities. And these are things that do not only affect your customers, pushing them away from that specific area, but they also affect the transportation, which you now have to pay for. They also affect your very industry that is within that specific place, because now Mother Nature is coming back to claim what was originally hers. But you do not get that in the short run. You get that in the long run. This is why investors, this is why governments, producers and the likes really have to look at this as some sort of long-term investments. Yes, people are telling me to use electricity. Yes, people are telling me to use, some kind of renewable resources. And yeah, they are more expensive, right, to invest in, but it is still saving you from what you're more likely to face in the future. People like oil. But if you use it in a way that it is non-sustainable, you're going to lose it in the future. What it means is that in the future, you're there looking for an alternative that you were given in the past. So now here we are, 40 years down the road, and now everyone is really into the idea of, oh, we should actually use electric cars because we are running out of oil. Should we then wait for those impacts to come and affect us in the long term, or should we make our long-term investments assuring us safety in the long term, but also economic growth in the long term? Because I believe economic growth can still be measured even in the long term, right? You can still say, we think we projected by this, GDP had increased by this 20 or decades down the road. You can still project it. So my idea is simple. Let's all look at this as investors, as governments, as a long-term investment. Even when you don't see like some sort of specific return in the short run, just know in the future you're protected from something that is probably going to affect your business, your customers, and the people, and even the structures that you've set up, your assets. So at the end of the day, if we take this as a long-term investment, we are surely going to understand that this is something very important. Thank you.
Let's ask a rhetorical question. So if we take it as a long-term investment, in the short run, entrepreneurs are people who are driven by profit. And if you're driven by profit, definitely you'll ask yourself this question: where do I gain from? People do not want to gain in the long run. People want to look at the profits that come in the short run. So I think I would argue that for both sides to have a win-win situation, you make a very good point. But government interventions such as tax holidays, among others, are very important for us to achieve the aspect of the short-term costs that these industries would incur, and then the long-term benefits that all of us will enjoy. But thank you very much for your submission. I'm going to come to you, Mr. Nyombi. We're still exploring the environmental economics. The topic today is sustainable development. Is it compatible with economic growth? Now, the last thing I want you to look at is the aspect of social equity versus economic growth. Earlier on in the conversation, we looked into, I gave you an example that we can have economic growth aside from the environment. We're looking at sustainable development. And sustainable development looks at inclusivity, the aspect of gender equality, employment, zero hunger, among others. All the 17 are very important. Now, when you look at social equity and economic growth, when industries are being established, definitely you know that we have people in the community. Let's start with the person who establishes that industry is the investor. And the investor is looking at making profit, not so? And the profit that they intend on making, they want to have very minimal expenditure, minimal costs, but have extremely high what? High profits. Now, what does this then therefore achieve? This achieves a number of things, or leads to a number of things in society. Among them is the inequalities that I talked about, the economic inequalities that I talked about. But even aside from the economic inequalities, at times even employers are not gender sensitive. They look at only employing one particular gender, and yet to achieve sustainable development, you need to be gender cautious, employ both genders, not so? So what can we do? Because economic growth, we can say we are going to set up industries, do what? but come up with other challenges as well, which affect social equity. So what can be done as we're achieving economic growth to help have or achieve social equity?
Thank you, Drake. I think it's all about having the right priorities. We as a nation or as the people of the world, if we set our priorities right, I think we can achieve this. For instance, if you are looking at the in sustainable development in terms of gender equality, let's set priorities and say, okay, in terms of employment, how much, if there are people who are left out, maybe the women are left out, what are we going to do to bring them to table? Bearing in mind of even our cultures, the way people think in society. So those things come along with the number of things that we're supposed to do. Civic education. Invest in civic education. Teach people about these things.
Inclusion.
The inclusivity. Bring them to table. If it's the youths, talk to the youths. Go to the cultural institutions. We talked about unemployment here. When you look at the unemployment levels in Uganda, they're quite high. So you would not be surprised if someone, because they do not have money, they have to go to the forest and they cut down the trees and burn charcoal simply because they want to earn a living. So what do we have to do? Educate the youths. I talked about that. Give them quality education. These people will come out when they are innovative to think about something that's different other than thinking of going to the forest to cut down the trees, to burn charcoal. Fund them. If there are startups down in the communities, we have to fund them. Instead of using the resources that we have, the monetary resources that we have, onto things that are not going to help us, let's channel them to things that are intended to achieve the SDGs. In the long run, we will see some changes. You talked about the renewable energy. We can shift. But that calls for you as an individual, as a person, you, Drake, or me, or even my Birunji and Ibrahim, we may not be able to bring out these ways how we can create other sources of energy. But governments can come in and support the youth in terms of solar development of solar systems. So these people will shift slowly by slowly from using the others to using the solar energy. In terms of hydro generation, we cannot do that as individuals. It's at the government level. So more of our leaders, that it's more of things that can be done with by our leaders in terms of priority, setting priority of things to be done that are in line with the SDGs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Pirunji, before we go for the break, you know when we're achieving economic growth, definitely the production is supposed to be moderately high, and definitely the consumption patterns increase. So what does that then therefore do? That means for the producer to go ahead and produce, they have to strain the environment, the aspect of resources. That means if let's say if let's say you have known that as let me say I'm a trader who deals in timber, and the demand for timber is so high. So what does that call for? Cutting down of what? Of trees that are compatible with timber. And what does that therefore then do? Affect the environment, because people want to grow economically. People want to have money in their pockets. Now, what can be done to address the consumption pattern vis-a-vis economic growth to help us? Because all of you have seemed to agree that sustainable development is compatible with economic growth. But in my opinion, basing on what I'm showing you right now, the consumption pattern and resource management seem to be in conflict. What can be done?
True. With social equity, well, social equity will look at better housing, quality education, high consumption rates. but still, I'll still draw back the line to making sure that these two are actually surviving alongside each other. If we are looking at alternative ways of building, instead of having your bungalow that is covering this whole place, how about you do horizontal construction so that we are consuming very, very less of the timber? Or how about we pick on alternative building materials? So it goes back to letting the environment and growth all live alongside each other.
Sure.
For sure.
Okay. I maybe expected the aspect of recycling to come in. But then let me now bring the debate to you as we conclude and go for the break, Mr. Rahim. You know, recycling is a song that has been sung to various industries across Uganda, across the globe, of which if I told you even to buy a bottle of water, you're going to see it recycle. Yes. Now, we are still discussing consumption patterns versus resource conservation. We said the more a country or the more there is a growth in a country's GDP, definitely the consumption patterns increases. And tonight's discussion we are looking at is sustainable development compatible with economic growth? And I've showed Birunji that you see when we have economic growth, the consumption patterns rises, and that leads to a strain onto the resources. That means if someone used to deal in timber, many people are going to construct houses because they have monies in their pockets, means more trees are cut. Now, how can you strike the balance between two, putting into perspective the aspect of recycling?
Okay. So let me give exactly that very example. So probably we don't know why people recycle or why people encourage others to recycle. What is the reason? The reason is very simple. If you have already produced plastics and people recycle them, you don't need to go back and kind of go through the experimentation, the mining, this kind of filtering the oil and getting all those raw materials you need to create plastic again. Now look, the enormous process of going back to get new things is what actually grievously affects the environment, right? Because now you have to mine, you have to re-experiment, you have to extract, you have to do all those things. Now those ones, or that process, is very, very harmful to the environment, right? On the other hand, yes, to some extent, in the recreation or kind of, you're trying to get back the shape of the bottle and things of the like, is still harmful to the environment. It is to a smaller extent though. That is why we basically encourage recycling. So it is the same idea. Even when people's consumption patterns are going to be high because now they have more money, which I don't think is the case in Uganda, but still, there is a very efficient way of managing those specific resources that people want. I'll give a very small example. I was at a hotel once, again because of debate. So I had paid money to go swimming, right? But it was midnight and they were asking us why we would want to swim at midnight. We are like, it's our money, right? We made it. It's our money. We paid for it. But then they told us that is harmful and dangerous. Why? Because you do not have a supervisor in place. You do not have that person to oversee who is drowning or the likes. Okay? So even when people have consumption patterns, the legitimate body as government has to recognize that this is something that is dangerous to people in the long run. It then directs its policies, its laws, towards reducing those specific consumption patterns. There's things like taxation that actually allow you to kind of manage the way people use their specific money. There's incentives that go on to allow people, people invest in things like bonds or the likes. Even when you have enormous amounts of money, doesn't mean that you go out and buy every little piece of car that you can find, right? You find a more better way to, conserve the environment, but also protect your own money. So I think there is legitimacy to that sort of understanding.
All right. Thank you very much. As you have had a very thrilling first half of this conversation. And just stay with us. We shall be back shortly. We are discussing is sustainable development compatible with economic growth. See you shortly. Thank you.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create, and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices, and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Thank you very much for staying with us. Right before we went into the break, we were discussing takeoffs that we could possibly address for us to see that as we are achieving sustainable development, we also need to consider the aspect of economic growth. We looked into consumption patterns versus resource conservation, among others. But I now want us to bring this debate into the perspective of policy, regulation, among others, that help us possibly achieve the aspect of sustainable development, considering that we look into the policy, we look into the regulation. I'll begin with you, Mr. Nyombi. Right before we went into the break, we looked into the takeoffs that we could possibly need to address for us to be in position to have sustainable development vis-a-vis economic growth. Now, my question to you is, what role does policy and regulation play in balancing sustainable development and economic growth?
To put it into perspective, like policies are there to regulate, and I think they bring things at a level ground between you and I, regardless of what class of person you are. So these are things that have to be followed by everyone. So it takes us back to now the leaders, the legislators, and even the implementers of the laws. So you bring up those policies that must be followed by each and everyone to ensure that we are in line with the SDGs, and also we are trying to reflect on how these things are going to take us to the growth.
Do you have an example of a policy or regulation?
I think, if my memory serves me right, I think we can even, okay, let's take the National Environmental Act that is being implemented by NEMA. Okay. We can use that as a benchmark here. That if we use policies that have been brought about by NEMA and enforce those laws equitably, the law must be blind, that you do not have to implement the law basing on who is before you. No, everyone, as long as you're on the wrong side of the law, you should be held accountable. Now, such laws should be should be implemented so that we see to it that we conserve the environment. If you're talking about water, having a clean environment and water, but besides that also, even in Kampala here, Kampala KCCA makes ordinances. If you're talking about infrastructure, let's look at policies that are aimed at having that infrastructure that is in line with the SDGs in terms of conservation of the environment. For instance, if you're talking about the drainage system, we should plan where people are going to work from, how are they going to work. If you're talking about pollution, air pollution, let's have ordinances in KCCA, by case ordinances by KCCA that ensure that if someone is having an industry, maybe in Kampala here, and they're polluting the air, what are the penalties? That should be put to book so that these people know if you do this, this is what you're going to face. You get that? So such policies are going to help us to safeguard our environment, have a clean and healthy environment where we are all going to live harmoniously.
All right. I'd like to engage with you, Biranji. I'm aware of a policy called it's called polluter pay principle. That it works in that if you're an industry and if you are an investor, you intend to establish an industry here in Uganda, you have to pay a particular amount of money for the emissions that you're going to have on the environment. That's a policy that is already existent in Uganda today. Now, explore the effectiveness of such a policy, because in my understanding, it's like you have such a policy, you're paying for polluting the air.
Right.
It's like you're walking 5 steps forward, 10 steps backward.
That's a very wrong policy. I can strongly say that's a very wrong policy.
Really?
You can't be paying to pollute the environment. Let me pay you so that I beat your dad up. That's something we're talking about here. Let me pay you to, okay, let me give you 10 slaps and I give you some money. That's exactly what we are. And that is exactly what I was talking about earlier, of the insatiable hunger for economic growth. We don't need to have high rates of economic growth. We have perceived economic growth that it's supposed to be a graph that is actually accelerating all the time. And we are leaving out the soft spot for humanity. That is why I keep saying economic growth and sustainable development have to work hand in hand. They have to be at the same line so as to achieve a good space for us to live. The next time we are looking at very high rates of economic growth, we'll have humanity being swept off this planet, and we won't have the next generation. I'm still reading from. I'm inspired by W. Rostow, and I was reading from his book of High Rates of Economic Growth, a non-communist manifesto. And in that book, he talks about the stages of growth. He talks about the traditional stage. He talks about the pre-takeoff stage, the takeoff stage, and the level of high mass consumerism. And at that point, we are looking at, he is setting the graph to be, it must grow. It must be high rates of growth. So what happens when we reach the top, and the charm of having very high economic growth is not working for the population? What if we're having a very high GDP, and actually the youth are so unemployed? We're having so many families in slums. So
from there, I want to intervene. You said that's a very bad policy, right?
Yes.
We're talking about sustainable development goals. We're talking about sustainable development. And for you to achieve sustainable development, you need to combat aspects of, you need to provide employment, you need to fight poverty. And a student of law yourself.
Yeah.
You know that certain principles, certain laws come in place to solve a particular what? Mischief. Now, just imagine, I'm bringing it back to the reality. Imagine that we do away with the law because it's a bad law, and we also stop industries from being constructed. Look at the detriment that it will do to the society. You see, in my understanding, I feel like this is a policy that is tailored towards at least fighting or mitigating a challenge at hand. Paying for the emissions that you emit is to help channel your energy, to help the government channel its resources on other areas. But that doesn't mean that they are not encouraging industries to put in mind that they should employ greenhouse gases.
Exactly. Now, instead of establishing such a policy, why can't they bring a stronger policy on waste management? Because we have industries that actually pollute the environment, that actually bring out those wastes and still do not manage them. So how about, instead of strengthening the other policy, how about they strengthen because they've already polluted the environment. How about the policy is now strengthened on how to manage the waste and how best this waste can be managed? But you cannot say, okay, you can waste the environment and then pay us money. And that is why I still stand and say that is a vague policy, because we are looking at sustainable development, and you said taking 5 steps in front and then 10 backwards. So imagine we are taking 10 steps backwards every single day, meaning we'll be 50 steps backward.
So in your opinion, what do you suggest?
So in my opinion, the government should actually strengthen the policies on waste management than strengthening you said the polluter pay?
The polluter pay
The
principle.
polluter pay policy. Yeah, they could actually strengthen
I think all the solutions that we bring forward can complement each other. Like she has said, we can have those policies where for waste management, but still we also need the polluter pay such policies. That if someone has broken the law, or someone has failed to meet their obligation and as far as managing the conserving the environment, there should be a penalty for that person. In this way, we are going to deter others. Take an instance, if Drake moved out of the studios here, then you go with a bottle of water, you take your water, then litter it somewhere. Then maybe I assume the water is about 1,000 shillings. Then you penalize and told to pay 50,000. Do you think you will ever do such a thing? You may not. Recently, Lema was proposing, I don't know where that has gone. They were proposing someone is moving in a car and they litter rubbish maybe on the street, along the road. They were suggesting about 6 million. Now, someone you're driving a car, maybe from Kampala to Masaka, maybe we're supposed to use 15,000 or 20,000 to Masaka. Then you penalize 6 million. I don't think there's any other person that will ever do such a thing. So basically, these laws are there to deter other people from doing it the same. So I want to inform my sister that we can have all these complementing each other.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. Before you come, because I see this is a very heated debate on the aspect of policy. Allow me first to engage you, Rahim. She argues that the polluter pay principle, in her opinion, is vague, and we need to look into aspect of waste management. He says we need to come up with stringent laws. All of them are looking in the aspect of laws, but bring in a very clear principle of the laws have to be what? Stringent. Now, my understanding is that when industries in Uganda are being established, and you are known to be, you're going to be a high emitting industry, there's a particular, you pay very high chunks of money. Yeah, you pay very high chunks of money before you establish that industry. But also, not only do you pay high chunks of money, you pay for the pollution that you make. Which, in my opinion, I think the reasoning behind coming up with such a policy is to not only protect the environment, but also it deters, because it sends a message that unless your pockets are deep enough, you cannot go ahead and establish an industry. So, in your opinion, what do you have to say about such a policy? Because we are looking at achieving sustainable development anyway.
Okay, so let me first say this. People in Uganda have money. Guys, 6 million is not money, especially if you want to show off. If guys can go ahead and drive around cars like Ferraris that shouldn't even be in Uganda because of our roads, but they bring them, people have money. So 6 million for dropping a bottle and showing you, I have the money to do so.
I would disagree though.
It's probably not enough. Yeah, but it is deterrent. But I'm going to engage on a more kind of higher principle than deterrence itself. And this is the principle of restoration. Where is this money, guys? So if industries actually pay for it, okay, we take the lucky chance that we are not even neglecting all the industries. All the guys can come and pay up. Where does our government use this money to kind of restore the environment? Which projects do we have? I'll give you a simple idea that we had as East African community for the EACOP. That was actually a good idea. I would love to see it being implemented in industries as well. So as this project was starting, they decided to make this what they call a net zero emission project. Now it means from the start to the end of that project, all the emissions that will be released, mining oil, doing what, using factory cars and the likes, are all being taken up by, they have some pieces of technology they have set up. They call them emission combatants, something like that. So that is the idea. The idea isn't you emit, you pay. The idea is you emit, you take away. All right. So they have like this sophisticated technology to combat those gases before they are even released into the atmosphere. Now, I believe that is a higher principle than even deterrence, because we still want economic growth. We actually want industries to come and be within our country. We want people to be employed. It's still consistent with sustainability. But the question is, if we are having these industries, to which degree are we able to reduce their effect on the environment? And I think that example of net zero emissions is like really, really great for this specific thing, because industries, it clearly shows you an industry can exist there. It can do all it wants, so long as it takes its trash, so long as it takes its waste away from there. And the reason as to why this is more consistent, like more than deterrence, is because of two things. When you give someone a right to pay, it becomes now like a payout mechanism. You get an idea. This person has no responsibility on that, okay? But when you tell them it's your obligation to make sure that these wastes are dealt with, it's your obligation to make sure that the CO2 is now dealt with. You're supposed to have these things that they have a way of reconverting them into safer gases anyways, right? So I think there, it is more consistent with what you want, because you still get the industry, they are going to come, so long as they can deal with their trash anyways, right? Because even for this specific project that I'm talking about, the EACOP, we actually had around, I don't know, there are so many bidders that wanted on this project, even with those kind of looking like stringent, because the thing looks like stringent, right? But yeah, people actually understand, because this is a global fight, everyone has to do something, even the investors. So on that, I think that's like my basic contribution. These companies, these industries have to have an obligation, an active obligation to actually put away these things that they impact on the environment. But you don't give them like a payout mechanism to just, we have paid you now. We don't care whether you use it efficiently or not. For us, we just pay, make money from you and leave.
But I'll still come back to the reality. You see, one thing I've known, we can debate principle, but
True.
the reality is, can we actually achieve a net zero emission in Uganda? Yes, then I'll have you respond.
Yes, we actually can. It is just the nature of the leaders that we actually send in there to present our views and actually implement them. Because we looked at the polluter pay policy, he highlighted on that very, very well. Of if you are paying money before you establish that industry, before I go there, imagine that the 10 industries that are being established around here in Ntinda, and those people are paying lots of money to actually pollute the environment. So meaning these people are just going to pay for polluting the environment, and in the long run, we'll have a whole polluted Ntinda, just polluted, and people have paid money. So that should actually be enough money to actually bring in to establish a project that is actually going to combat all the gases and all the wrong fumes that are coming to the environment. So it is actually possible. It is a question of who is presenting these views and how are they packaging them. And
hang on, just there before you come in. The reality is, how many people sit down and look at, are we protecting the environment? Because what people look at is the economics, the money. You're setting up an industry, how much are you bringing in terms of revenue to the country, and how much are you bringing in terms of employment opportunities. So how are you going to bring, because our leaders, oftentimes, people do not have these conversations. So what are you going to do?
That's exactly what I was going to. Or do we have these debates in Parliament? Do we bring these debates in Parliament? And who is tabling these debates? Because if we had someone who is packaging them really well to ably convince the public, and the public is up in arms, they should send people like us.
So do you have
to
plans in
package,
2020?
yes, to package these views better and convince the whole public and convince the floor of Parliament that we can actually combat these gases, that we can combat these fumes and have a cleaner environment for sustainable development. Because in the long run, it won't be sustainable development anymore. It will be who is rich and who is poor.
Which constituency are you from?
Shema.
Okay, in 2026 we should look out for for Shema North or Shema
Shema, no.
Shema North. All right, you had something to say, sir.
Yeah, it's about, I'll talk about 3 or 4 things. One, governance. If the people in government, and when I say government, I don't want to take the other ordinary meaning of government where they're talking about
both?
everyone is in government. No, I mean the stakeholders who have a say in government. We are talking about the executive and the legislature. In fact, even the judiciary. Here, that if someone, okay, let's begin with the legislature. If there are laws, and maybe there are no laws first, let's try to put in place better laws that are going to help us combat this.
But we already have those laws.
Yes, there are. Now that's one. The executive, and here we are having the enforcement, put them in practice without segregation. That's another thing. Now the judiciary, I'm sorry to say this, but I think you realize that people who have money, of course, they will bypass. You know, so let's let the government, all the arms of government, work hand in hand, ensure that if someone is caught on the bad side, okay, make sure first of all the laws are in place. If those laws are in place, how are they being implemented? If someone is caught on the bad side of the law, if this person is in the judiciary, let this be something to be taken as important, that even others outside feel like I should never do this again. But if I take into court and they are just released, they pay their way out if maybe they're taken at the police stations. That's one. Then the second one is about the ordinary people here. Our ethics as the ordinary people. I don't know, but even in our cultures, we are told to live in an environment that is one, clean, and even ensuring that it is safe for all of us. The trees that people cut down, these trees did not grow maybe 3 years ago. There are trees that have been there over time, maybe 60 years. Now, why would you, a 20-year-old, cut down a tree that has been existing for 60 years?
Money.
You get that? So even if you love money, I think we can come back as individuals in our respective homes. Parents, talk to your children. Tell them, please, we must conserve the environment. For the people that are going to come, just imagine you did not find that tree there that you're cutting. Do you think your grandparents did not have needs? Maybe they did have those, but they preserved those trees for the future generations. Okay. Even our government, they are so much preoccupied with money, like she was talking about here. It shouldn't be the biggest thing that we are looking at, especially if you're looking at environmental conservation. Let's do that. There are things that we can say, okay, this one, we are letting go, just for the sake of our environment. You get that?
Okay.
But the fact that we are preoccupied and investors come, give them this part of land, some area, you know, you can sit down and say, okay, for the generations to come, because we're going to get the money that we need today, tomorrow to satisfy our needs. But in the long run, we are going to lose our lives. People may not have where to live.
Okay.
Yes.
Just from there, I want to engage Rahim. We're speaking of policy, right? Speaking about policy, and the topic today is sustainable development compatible with economic growth. I want you to explore the presidential executive order that was issued in the districts of Amoro, in northern Uganda, Gulu, among others, the aspect of charcoal burning. You understand that for economic growth, people do various economic activities to derive sustenance. And the economic activity that was happening in the districts of Gulu, Amoro, among those districts was charcoal burning, right? And we're talking about SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. People have to eat, people have to send their children to school, people have to survive. In Uganda, you can't thrive easily. You survive, right? We are surviving. Now, such a presidential directive, without considering or putting into perspective what alternative is in place, do you think then, in your opinion, that sustainable development, is it actually compatible with economic growth, considering that these people do not have an alternative at the moment, but what they had was cutting down trees for burning what? Charcoal. So how would you then therefore argue that we can have sustainable development compatible with economic growth?
Okay. So let me get this right. Because of sustainable development, or because of the need for sustainable development, the president ordered that people who are doing a certain economic activity,
Charcoal burning,
that probably leads to economic growth. I'm quoting this because probably leads to economic growth. Charcoal burning.
It does actually lead to economic growth.
Lead to economic growth. Yeah, that happened. So sustainable development at the cost of economic growth, as we would presume. So, yeah, I think it's still, to some extent, justified. The only problem with that is no alternative, right? That is the only problem. That's literally the only problem. But we can all agree that the course of action is justified. Why? Because, okay, even if we let you chop down the things, we all know probably the northern region of Uganda faces like a high rate of desertification. It's been talked about, I think, from SST, I still remember it. This guy is telling us it's probably going to turn into Sudan, a desert-like region, or things of the like. And this is because it's customary to those kinds of activities, constantly chopping down, having like no response to that sort of thing, right? No mindset about like environmental conservation and the likes. So yeah, people do have to eat. But then the only thing you would think about is the alternative that government provides for these specific people. So I think personally, as an alternative, government literally has a budget it could look into to kind of initially first provide like some sort of, this is something this is why I'm saying it's very consistent with economic growth. Because even when government wants to set up an industry, that land has been occupied by people, right? So what those people will do, catch compensation, we set up an industry. The people will say, cool, this is good for us. So we leave, so we have something to deal with currently, and then we'll progress on later because activities still come up, right? So that is the basic idea. The first thing we need is government to give like some sort of compensation to those specific people, right? For that activity, because it is still justified. You don't want them to harm themselves along with the environment. Then I think from there, we can look into those specific alternatives that, that can be given to them. There is things like, government literally does so many things when it comes to economic growth that it is probably diverting from when it comes to sustainable development. It just issues orders because probably it is something justified. I mean, we have seen reallocation of people, right? You just need to get into your budgets or your pockets and pick some money to buy land for these specific people if you feel like that is an area that should be conserved.
Rhetoric. Do we have the money to?
We have the land. We do have the land,
it's
actually.
Okay. Birinji has something to say.
I would just have to supplement on what Rahim said about the alternative that we could pick on. one of the cheapest forms of energy we could utilize is solar energy. And this is under the environmental categories of sustainable development that we could indulge in. So how about we pick on solar energy instead of giving them iron sheets? Give them some solar panels and let them utilize that. Government actually has the money because these people are paying the taxes. Every time you buy a small matchbox, you're paying a tax for that. There are so many taxes because with economic growth, we are looking at revenue too. There's so many taxes that are actually being paid there. So we just need to see how best these taxes can actually come back to those who are, because why are we paying these taxes? To benefit us, to benefit the people. So how about these taxes are actually used to extend those services so as to combat them from, because at this point, these people are vulnerable. They do not have an option. At this point, they're cutting down trees to burn charcoal so that they can survive. So how about you help them survive? How are you going to do that? Give them back what they deserve, because they deserve that. They deserve to have the solar energy. Okay, we may not have to go into dams yet to give them hydro.
Allow me interject.
Yes, please.
You suggest an alternative of solar energy.
Yeah.
You are aware that northern Uganda produces 60% of the charcoal that Uganda consumes. That being the case, let's look at the other effects that it has. Many households in our country survive or use charcoal for cooking. Now, what does that therefore lead to? The price of charcoal is going to go exceedingly high because, the person producing or the supply is low. But that even aside, we are going to look into the aspect of the alternative. Let's say the government gives the people who are engaging in charcoal burning solar. How about the other households who survive on charcoal for cooking? If they do not have the capacity to go for gas or any other, what shall they use? The question is sustainable development compatible with economic growth?
I would love to finish whatever it is that I was bringing to table. That solar energy and giving those panels to those homes and families.
But does solar energy, can it be used to cook?
Yes.
But are we there yet with that technology?
Yes, we've seen people use solar energy to cook. So it is, because let me tell you once again, there's money with government. There's so many taxes that we pay. Look at the population of Uganda. Each one of us is paying a tax. Even the baby who is buying that clothes they're putting on is paying a tax. So there is so much money that can actually pitch those projects. But the only problem is, who is handling that money?
It's okay. Just let him say something.
When you're talking about alternatives, what Raymond's talked about, first to the people who are producing, the producers of charcoal in Uganda, we first have to create alternatives, generating income generating activities for these people. That takes us back to finding
agriculture activities,
yes, agriculture, any other activity which is eco-friendly and even environmentally friendly. Yes. Then come to the people who are consuming. The cost of electricity in Uganda is quite high. But besides that, even the accessibility to electricity, I was reading, it's about 42%, the entire coverage.
And yet we sell electricity to Kenya and Rwanda.
But even those who are accessing the electricity, it's very high. So you cannot use that electricity to cook. You get that? How about if we think of bringing every Ugandan, helping every Ugandan to access electricity? That is one. Then those who have access, if they have all access to electricity, then how much are we getting from these people? The cost that they are incurring in using electricity. It's going to help us in several ways. Even those people in northern Uganda who are burning down the trees to get charcoal, and who are cutting down the trees to get charcoal, if you even extend electricity to them, they are going to involve other means of generating income. Here in Uganda, people can earn from whatever, electricity is going to help us in several ways. If you're having electricity, people set up small businesses. Someone will have a fridge, they start selling drinks other than thinking of going to the bush to cut down, to the forest to cut down the trees. The other thing in getting alternatives, ours in Uganda is I don't want to say it's a small country, it's a big country, but we find that most of the people are in urban centers. You get that? So being in urban centers, even government has failed to develop the rural areas, and they are bring most of the developments, all the things that are needed in the urban centers. Now, we are looking forward to organizing the World Cup, I think jointly with
African Cup of Nations.
It's African Cup of Nations, jointly with Kenya and Tanzania. Now, what if our government thinks of, let's say, having a stadium in a different part of Uganda? In one way, when we're having people going that side, people in, let's say now in northern Uganda, if we have a state-of-the-art stadium that side, maybe another airport that side, we shift from Kampala, even some of the activities shift and they are spread to other parts of Uganda. This is going to tap into the economy here. Otherwise, the economy is based, centrally based.
Right.
And this will have nothing to do.
It's okay.
Yeah.
When you had something to say.
Yes, I just wanted to draw a story of how much charcoal is and how much electricity is. Or imagine you have sufficient supply of yaka, which we are using umone, and you have 3 bags of charcoal in your house. It is smaller. We are spending on both of them. So it is just priority and enlightenment of the people. Sustainable development.
I would like to say that how much is a unit of yaka? 1,000 Ugandan shillings. That is possibly a meal for someone out there. And that aside, the connectivity of people to electricity, as you said, only 42% have access to electricity. Someone was telling me that now that the president has issued an executive order for people in northern Uganda to stop cutting charcoal, just imagine if the State House uses charcoal. That's if at all they actually use charcoal for cooking. Yeah? Imagine if State House uses charcoal for, no, just imagine. Yeah. What does that mean? That now that they've stopped using of charcoal, for them what they'll do, increase the State House budget and Parliament will just approve. Does the poor Ugandan have that luxury? No. Definitely not. That is why we're having such conversations. Which brings me to now our final conclusion. The aspect of stakeholder perspective, that we ought to involve every Ugandan into this conversation before actually going ahead to come up with policies that affect the rural person. You see, we can decide to say we want to protect the environment, but we also need to put into perspective the policies that we are passing. Are they eco-friendly? Do they actually consider everyone, the aspect of sustainable development? That is why tonight we're discussing this. So just before we conclude, I'm going to give each of you a minute or so to give your concluding remarks and what you think in summary of tonight's discussion. I'll begin with you, Rahim.
Okay, so I will end with the first thing I started with. So yeah, I think it is very consistent of an idea to say to involve people in sustainable development. It is a sacrifice they actually make. Instead of making money, you want them to do something for people that they haven't even seen yet, right? So you should actually involve these people, but involve them how? They need to know why this is justified for their cause of life to be like that. You need to know why you're forcing people to transition from charcoal to electricity, even when it's expensive, even when you need to buy things like heaters and the likes. Because if you don't, these people have the liberty, not the liberty, but these people can actually just ignore those things. Like we've seen Banda Kavera, like we've seen the idea of, having to pay if your car doesn't have a trash can and things of the like. These are all things that were implemented. These are all things that were actually written up in policy, but faded off because people didn't adhere to them. So you need to give people that kind of significance. And the reason as to why that is still consistent with sustainable development is because it is social equity in of itself. people need an understanding of what happens in their sustainable world, of what happens in their world that they want to be sustainable. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's a very powerful closing. Yes, Birunji.
I will also pick on what I began with, that sustainable development is not only compatible with economic growth, but also needed, because the environment depends on, no, economic growth depends on the environment to trade, to travel, to produce, to have a high GDP that is enough for the economy. So having an economy that is actually rapidly growing but is actually leaving out the other people to grass and to cry around and not have jobs and be in slum areas is actually very hazardous. So we'll need both of them to actually be alongside each other so as to have a thriving generation.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Nyombi?
Yeah, Mr. Drake and my colleagues, when the world leaders were coming together to formulate the SDGs, they looked at about 5 principles, tenets that we are going to rely on to have the things come into reality. One is the people. Let's have people come on board.
Participation.
Yeah, participation. And for people to participate, they must be believing in what you're telling them. If you don't do what you are saying, people will not believe in you. Then the other thing, I put into consideration of the planet. And the planet, now this is the people and even the people, the other things that are around us here. You must put it into consideration as well. If you don't, that means you're going to do your own thing. Then the other one, let's look at peace. And peace, when I'm talking of peace, you shouldn't address your mind maybe to war. And even the economy, so if people are not economically well, they are not at peace. So even if you say 1,000 words about the environment, about water or what, and you have not prioritized things that are going to help people have an economic well-being, all this is nothing that we're going to talk about. Then the other one is partnerships. Like what we first talked about here, is bringing everyone at the table. Civil society, bring the youth, talk to them. Because now we occupy the biggest number of people in this country. You cannot just isolate the youth if you bring up such discussions, or even on the policies. It must be through the youth that you have now enlightened the entire country. I think we should bring everyone at the table.
Definitely.
Otherwise, we shall perish.
All right.
Yeah.
As I've heard it from the panelists, tonight has been a very interesting and intriguing conversation, especially after just celebrating World Environment Day. I'm very humbled that we had a very nice discussion. Thank you, Haruna. Thank you, Birunji. Thank you, Rahim. Yes, thank you very much. Today we were discussing, is sustainable development compatible with is it compatible with economic growth? Definitely, as you heard from the panelists there, they gave their views and they gave their opinions. But from me to you, I would say that the environment requires all of us to act, and not only to act tomorrow, but act now. As we celebrated World Environment Day, the theme was Beat Plastic Pollution. Let us try our level best in our various localities, in our various placings in life, to do all that it takes to see that we protect our environment, because there is no any other earth apart from the one that we live in. Thank you very much. Onen Douglas Drake is my name. Again, watch us next week, same time, same place. Thank you to the technical team, Rashid and the crew. We appreciate very much. See you next week. Bye-bye.